This presentation is titled The Exploration and Exploitation of the Caribbean from Sweet Success to Economic Necessity. Let's examine the Caribbean gold rush, a sweet story with dark consequences. Powerful trade syndicates and European powers that created centuries of slavery, the science that eventually was the demise of the sugar boom, and what is its replacement. Enjoy. The European age of exploration, also known as the Age of Discovery, spanned roughly from the 15th to the 17th century. It was a transformative period when European nations, driven by a mix of curiosity, economic ambition, and religious zeal, ventured beyond their borders to explore and map the world. This era saw the rise of maritime expeditions, with explorers like Christopher Columbus, Vasco da Gama, and Ferdinand Magellan leading the charge. The Portuguese and Spanish were pioneers, establishing sea routes to Asia, Africa, and the Americas. Their discoveries not only expanded trade networks, but also initiated the colonization of new territories. This period laid the groundwork for globalization, connecting previously isolated parts of the world and reshaping economies, cultures, and political landscapes. The Silk Road was blocked by the Ottoman Turks who took over Constantinople in 1453, so alternate routes were needed. The Portuguese find an all-water route to Asia in the late 15th century. Europeans wanted a faster and cheaper trading route to India and China to be able to transport gold, silk, spices, ivory, cotton, citrus, and so on. Spain then gets into the fray with Columbus in 1492, setting sail to the west and finding the Greater and Lesser Antilles. God, glory, and gold, not necessarily in that order. The Spanish pursuit of God, glory, and gold was a driving force behind their exploration and conquest during the Age of Exploration. These three motivations intertwined to shape their actions in the New World. Gold. The Spanish were eager to amass wealth, particularly in the form of gold and other precious resources. Stories of vast riches in the Americas fueled their expeditions, leading to the conquest of empires like the Aztecs and Incas. Glory, personal and national prestige played a significant role. Conquistadors sought fame and recognition for their daring exploits, while Spain aimed to establish itself as a dominant global power. God, religious zeal was a key motivator. The Spanish sought to spread Christianity, often forcibly converting indigenous populations and eradicating native religious practices. This trio of motivations not only drove Spanish expansion, but also left a lasting impact on the cultures and histories of the regions they encountered. The Treaty of Tordesillas, signed on June 7, 1494, was a significant agreement between Spain and Portugal, and sorted out by the papacy. It aimed to resolve disputes over newly discovered lands following Christopher Columbus's voyages. The treaty established an imaginary line approximately 370 miles west of the Cape Verde Islands. Lands to the west of this line were allocated to Spain, while those to the east were designated for Portugal. This division allowed both nations to expand their empires without conflict, shaping the colonial map of the Americas, Africa, and Asia. However, other European powers did not recognize the treaty, leading to future territorial disputes. Spanish Pope Alexander VI and his family. This picture is taken from the TV show The Borgias. The legend of El Dorado, a mythical city of gold, did indeed play a role in spurring European exploration, particularly in South America. originating from the Muisca people's rituals in present-day Colombia. The story of a golden king who covered himself in gold dust and performed ceremonies at Lake Guatavita was misinterpreted by Spanish conquistadors as evidence of a city brimming with gold. This myth fueled numerous expeditions by Spanish and other European explorers who ventured deep into uncharted territories in search of untold riches. While El Dorado itself was never found, the relentless pursuit of this legend led to significant geographic discoveries and the expansion of European influence in the Americas. Potosi, Bolivia, is renowned for its vast mineral wealth, particularly its silver deposits. The city is home to Cerro Rico, or Rich Hill, which has been one of the world's most productive silver mines since the 16th century. During the Spanish colonial era, Potosi's silver accounted for a significant portion of global silver production, fueling the Spanish Empire's economy and influencing global trade. In addition to silver, Potosi's mines have yielded other valuable minerals, including gold, tin, zinc, and lead. The discovery of silver in Potosi not only transformed the city into a bustling economic hub, but also had a profound impact on the indigenous population, as forced labor systems like the Mita were implemented to extract these resources. Today, while mining continues in Potosi, the legacy of its mineral wealth is a mix of historical significance and ongoing challenges, including environmental concerns and the preservation of Cerro Rico. Potosi was founded in 1546 as a mining town. It became one of the largest cities in the Americas and the world, with a population exceeding 200,000 people by 1561, bigger than Paris or London. A true boom town that included some 80 churches and many thousands of slaves to work in the mines. In comparison to the rest of the New World, the Caribbean islands were poor relations, especially the Lesser Antilles. The Caribbean islands were mainly used as way stations for the transport of gold and silver from these very rich mining areas in South America. The white gold rush in the Caribbean around 1625 refers to the booming sugar trade. Sugar, often called white gold, became a highly valuable commodity as European demand for it skyrocketed. The Caribbean islands, with their ideal climate and fertile soil, became the epicenter of sugar production. European powers such as Spain, England, France, and the Netherlands established vast sugar plantations in the region. These plantations relied heavily on enslaved labor, initially using indigenous peoples, and later importing millions of Africans through the transatlantic slave trade. The sugar trade not only transformed the Caribbean's economy, but also had a profound impact on global trade networks, fueling the rise of European empires. This era marked the beginning of a brutal system of exploitation, with lasting social and cultural consequences for the Caribbean and beyond. The word sugar has its roots in ancient languages and trade connections. It can be traced back to India and the Sanskrit word shakara, which referred to ground or candied sugar. This term passed into Persian as shakar, then into Arabic as sukar. Through the expansion of Islamic trade networks, the word made its way into European languages. In the Middle Ages, it entered Old Italian as zucchero, and from there into Old French as sucre, which influenced the English term sugar. The journey of this word reflects the movement of sugar itself as a commodity, traveling across cultures, continents, and centuries. Written between 1500 to 500 BC, provides the first documentation of the cultivation of sugar cane and of the manufacture of sugar in the Bengal region of India. Muslims were the early masters of sugar, and they began to use it in lavish displays. Combining sugar with almonds, as is still done today to make marzipan, Muslim cooks built elaborate edible sculptures. Sugarcane was introduced to the Caribbean by Christopher Columbus during his second voyage in 1493. He brought sugarcane cuttings to the island of Hispaniola, modern-day Haiti, and the Dominican Republic. The crop thrived in the Caribbean's tropical climate, and its cultivation quickly spread across the region. The Portuguese and Spanish initially developed sugarcane plantations in their colonies, but by the 17th century, other European powers like the English, French, and Dutch also established sugar plantations in the Caribbean. This marked the beginning of the region's transformation into a major hub for sugar production, driven by enslaved labor and the global demand for sugar. The Dutch played a significant role in spreading sugarcane cultivation in the Caribbean, particularly after their expulsion from Brazil in the mid-17th century. When the Portuguese reclaimed control of Brazil, many Dutch planters, along with their expertise in sugar production, relocated to the Caribbean. They introduced advanced sugar processing techniques and helped establish sugar plantations in English and French colonies, such as those in St. Kitts and Nevis. The shift from crops like cotton and tobacco to sugarcane on islands like Barbados was largely driven by the influence of Dutch settlers and merchants in the 1640s. Sugar was quickly snapped up by the British, who used it in cakes and to sweeten teas. This transformation was also encouraged by the growing European demand for sugar, which was becoming a highly valuable commodity. The success of sugar plantations in Barbados set a precedent for other Caribbean islands, leading to the region's dominance in the global sugar trade. Sugar was the main crop produced on plantations throughout the Caribbean in the 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries. The sugarcane plant is jointed with stalks and can grow up to 20 feet. It is rich in sugar and is a member of the perennial grass family. Sugarcane quickly exhausts the soil in which it grows. Planters used larger islands with fresher soil into production in the 19th century, as demand for sugar in Europe continued to increase. Most islands were covered with cane fields and mills for refining. Efficiency and speed was needed in sugar production, because the instant the sugar stalk is sliced, the sweetness inside starts to harden and turn woody. African slaves became the dominant source of plantation workers because they were more resistant to malaria and yellow fever, and because the supply of slaves was abundant on the African coast. The Atlantic slave trade spanned over 400 years, from the 15th to the 19th century. It involved the forced transportation of millions of Africans to the Americas, where they were enslaved and exploited for labor. This trade was a central component of the triangular trade system, which connected Europe, Africa, and the Americas. European powers, including Portugal, Spain, England, France, and the Netherlands, played significant roles in this trade. Enslaved Africans were captured or purchased in West and Central Africa, often through local intermediaries, and endured the brutal Middle Passage across the Atlantic. Conditions on the ships were inhumane, with overcrowding, disease, and high mortality rates. Once in the Americas, enslaved people were forced to work on plantations, producing cash crops like sugar, tobacco, and cotton, which were then exported to Europe. The trade had devastating effects on African societies, leading to population loss, social disruption, and economic exploitation. Sugar cane was most efficiently grown on large plantations with many workers. In 1680, the median size of a plantation in Barbados had increased to about 60 slaves. Some islands proved more successful than others when it came to producing sugar. In Barbados and the British Leeward Islands, sugar provided 93% of exports. Sugar cane was most efficiently grown on large plantations with many workers. In 1680, the median size of a plantation in Barbados had increased to about 60 slaves. Some islands proved more successful than others when it came to producing sugar. In Barbados and the British Leeward Islands, sugar provided 93% of exports. After the abolition of slavery, indentured laborers from India, China, and Java migrated to the Caribbean to mostly work on the sugar plantations. These plantations produced 80 to 90% of the sugar consumed in Western Europe. For about 100 years, Barbados remained the richest of all the European colonies in the Caribbean. As part of the mass sugar industry, sugar cane processing gave rise to related commodities such as rum, molasses, and falernum. In case you are wondering, falernum is a versatile syrup or liqueur originating from the Caribbean, particularly Barbados. It is known for its sweet, spicy, and citrusy flavor profile, which typically includes ingredients like lime, ginger, almond, cloves, and sometimes allspice. The Molasses Act of 1733 was a law passed by the British Parliament to regulate trade within the British Empire. It imposed a tax of 6 pence per gallon on molasses, sugar, and rum imported into the North American colonies from non-British colonies. The act aimed to protect British West Indies sugarcane growers by making their products more competitive compared to those from French and other foreign colonies. However, the act was largely ineffective due to widespread smuggling and bribery, as American colonists sought to avoid the higher costs. It was part of the broader Navigation Act, which sought to control colonial trade and ensure profits for Britain. The Molasses Act was later replaced by the Sugar Act of 1764, which imposed stricter regulations and contributed to growing tensions leading to the American Revolution. Parliament created the act largely at the insistence of large plantation owners in the British West Indies. Later, further taxes were imposed on paper, tea, etc., which, as I previously mentioned, eventually led to the American Revolution. The discovery of extracting sugar from beets in 1747 would be the event that started the downfall of the plantations. Andreas Marggraf was a pioneering German chemist known for his contributions to analytical chemistry and his discovery of sugar in beets. Born in Berlin, Marggraf was the son of a pharmacist and developed an early interest in chemistry. He introduced innovative methods in experimental chemistry, such as using alcohol to extract sugar from beets in 1747, which laid the foundation for the modern sugar industry. Marggraf also made significant advancements in inorganic chemistry, including isolating zinc and improving the production of phosphorus. His meticulous approach to experimentation and his use of tools like the microscope for chemical identification were groundbreaking for his time. Although he adhered to the outdated phlogiston theory, his work influenced future chemists and industries. Let's discuss the social, economic, and cultural changes created during the 16th and 19th century sugar revolution in the Caribbean. The population dynamics shifted dramatically with the large-scale importation of African slaves to work on sugar plantations. This led to a predominantly African-descended population in many Caribbean islands. Societies transitioned into rigidly stratified systems where race and class determined one's status. The enslaved Africans faced harsh conditions, while a small elite of European planters held power. The white population decreased as many Europeans moved back to Europe or to other colonies. Continuing our discussion of the changes, let's turn our attention to economic changes. Sugar now became the backbone of the Caribbean economy, replacing crops like tobacco. This monoculture made the region heavily reliant on sugar exports. Land ownership patterns changed, with small landholders being pushed out in favor of large estates owned by wealthy planters. The transatlantic slave trade became a lucrative business, supplying the labor needed for sugar production. Finally, we need to talk about cultural changes. African cultural influences became deeply embedded in Caribbean society, from music and dance to religion and cuisine, as enslaved Africans brought their traditions with them. European colonial powers imposed their languages, religions, and governance systems, creating a blend of African, European, and indigenous cultures. The sugar revolution not only reshaped the Caribbean, but also had global implications, fueling the transatlantic slave trade and influencing economies and societies far beyond the region. During the 17th century, many Irish and Scottish people were forcibly transported to Barbados as indentured servants or prisoners of war, particularly under Oliver Cromwell's rule. These individuals were often referred to as white slaves, though their status differed from that of African slaves. Indentured servants were bound by contracts for a set number of years, after which they could gain freedom, unlike African slaves who were enslaved for life. The conditions for these indentured servants were harsh, with many subjected to brutal treatment and grueling labor on sugar plantations. However, over time, the use of African slaves became more prevalent, and the demand for white indentured labor declined. The term redlegs refers to the descendants of these white indentured servants. The name is believed to originate from the sunburned legs of these fair-skinned individuals who worked under the harsh Caribbean sun. Over the centuries, the redlegs became a marginalized community, often living in poverty and isolation. Many of them resided in the parish of St. John and other rural areas of Barbados. Several sources state that some of these prisoners of war included soldiers captured at the battles of Dunbar and Worcester. Scottish rebels were transported to Barbados in 1667 and again in 1685. And the last group of Scottish rebels transported to Barbados appears to be individuals involved in the Jacobite Rebellion of 1745. More than 50,000 Irish were also transported from Ireland to Barbados. More were sent to other islands in the West Indies. Today, the Redlegs are a small and close-knit community, with some members still facing economic challenges. Efforts have been made to preserve their history and improve their living conditions. This history highlights the complex and often painful legacy of colonialism in the Caribbean. Redlegs in Barbados are also known as poor whites, eki bekis, poor bakras, or Ide white mice. It seems relatively unheard of that there lies a possibility of a white race in Barbados that can be considered poor, a country where the word white has always been synonymous with success and power for centuries. The photo shows one family all living in one small chattel house. The house is divided into a series of very small rooms, and the shower and toilet are outside, hidden behind the corrugated iron fencing. Bajan pop star Rihanna has Irish ancestry on her father's side. Born in the parish of St. Michael, Barbados on February the 20th, 1988, her mother Monica Braithwaite, a retired accountant, is a mix of African and Guyanese. Her father, Ronald Fenty, was a warehouse supervisor. He is of Barbadian and Irish ancestry. After the sugar boom ended in the Caribbean, other natural resources were pursued. Let's turn our attention to bauxite, the raw material that aluminum is made from. In the Caribbean region, there are three main producers of bauxite circled in yellow on the map, namely Jamaica, the island of Hispaniola and Guyana. Bauxite is the primary ore from which aluminum is extracted. It is a sedimentary rock primarily composed of aluminum hydroxide minerals, along with traces of iron oxides, silica, and other impurities. Bauxite typically appears reddish-brown due to its iron content, but it can also be white, gray, or yellow, depending on the specific composition. It forms in tropical or subtropical regions through weathering processes that decompose rocks rich in aluminum, like granite or basalt. Bauxite is mainly processed to produce alumina, aluminum oxide, which is then refined into aluminum metal. Aluminum is used in a wide range of industries, from construction and transportation to packaging and electronics. British Guiana, now Guyana, was the major supplier of high-grade bauxite to Canada during the war years. The aluminum produced was used by the American military for the production of aircraft. Roughly 2/3 of all Allied aircraft manufactured during the war years used Guyana aluminum. German U-boats were deployed in the Caribbean in an attempt to curtail supplies of petroleum and bauxite reaching the USA and Canada. Be sure to watch my presentation titled Imprisoned in the Caribbean, the 1942 German U-boat blockade of the Caribbean and its far-reaching effect. Historically, one of the most prosperous of the Caribbean islands due to petroleum production and refining. It is a tectonically broken off portion of Venezuela, so Trinidad has similar geology to Venezuela. It is not part of the Lesser Antilles volcanic chain. Many oil refinery locations in the Caribbean historically have refined petroleum products from Venezuela and Mexico. As can be seen on the map, very few of the refinery locations are still active. The economy is based largely on oil and natural gas production, with the petroleum industry accounting for more than 40% of GDP between 2006 and 2014. Belize, Suriname, and Trinidad and Tobago continue to face the aftershocks of the 2014 drop in world prices for oil and other commodities. Trinidad and Tobago, however, tumbled to approximately 22% of GDP in 2015 and 2016 after a sharp drop in international oil prices. The country has become a major financial center in the Caribbean as well. The Lesser Antilles Islands generally lack significant oil and gas potential due to their geological characteristics. These islands are part of a volcanic arc formed by the subduction of the Atlantic plate beneath the Caribbean plate. This tectonic activity creates conditions favorable for volcanic and geothermal energy, but not for the accumulation of hydrocarbons like oil and gas, with the exception of one island, namely Barbados. Natural disasters cost the region an estimated $8.6 billion between 1996 and 2015. Since then, major hurricanes caused even more damages. Hurricanes Irma and Maria, both in September 2017, had devastating impacts on the Caribbean. Hurricane Irma, a Category 5 storm, caused widespread destruction across islands like Barbuda, St. Martin, and the British Virgin Islands. Entire communities were flattened, and infrastructure, including homes, schools, and hospitals, was severely damaged. Barbuda, for instance, was left nearly uninhabitable, forcing its entire population to evacuate. Just weeks after Irma, Hurricane Maria, another Category 5 storm, struck Puerto Rico directly, causing catastrophic damage. It was the most intense hurricane to hit the island since 1928. Maria's high winds and torrential rains led to widespread flooding, landslides, and the collapse of critical infrastructure. Puerto Rico experienced a prolonged power outage, with some areas remaining without electricity for months. The storm also caused significant loss of life and disrupted access to clean water, health care, and basic necessities. These hurricanes add to the economic problems faced by most Caribbean islands, and it goes without saying that some islands recover faster than others. What effects will sea level changes have on the Caribbean? The sea level data so far indicates that current sea level increase is 3.2 millimeters per year. If this remains constant for the next 80 years, then a 10-inch sea level rise would be expected. This rise could impact coastal communities of the Caribbean if they are less than 10 inches above the sea. Antigua and Barbuda. The main industry besides tourism is sand mining that takes place on the island of Barbuda. Sand mining has historically been the largest industry on the island, despite its potentially devastating side effects. Sand extraction from the beaches of Barbuda is a major cause of erosion, leaving parts of the island vulnerable to increasing sea levels and the high waves of tropical storms. Beach erosion is occurring as a direct result of this effort, and protection from sea level increases are impaired. Before we finish this presentation, we need to address the rise of Chinese interests in the Caribbean area. After the tiny Caribbean island of Grenada severed diplomatic ties with Taiwan in 2005, it received a token of appreciation from the mainland Chinese government, amounting to a $55 million cricket stadium. It was part of $132 million China doled out to Caribbean countries in aid and soft loans in the years leading up to the 2007 Cricket World Cup. At the time, the investment was seen as a not-so-subtle reward to countries that had broken off formal relations with Taipei in favor of Beijing. The Freeport Container Port on Grand Bahama Island is an approximately $3 billion Chinese development of expansion of a deep-water container port. Situated only 65 miles from Florida, the Freeport Container Port is the transshipment hub for the eastern seaboard of the Americas and the principal east-west line haul routes through the region. Beijing funded construction of a new $1.4 billion bridge spanning the Panama Canal called the Atlantic Bridge. China has made significant investments in the Panama Canal area, primarily through Hong Kong-based companies like CK Hutchison Holdings. This company has operated key ports at both ends of the canal, the Balboa port on the Pacific side and the Cristobal port on the Atlantic side since 1997. These ports are crucial for managing the flow of goods through the canal, which is a vital international trade route. China's involvement in the Panama Canal has been part of its broader Belt and Road Initiative, aimed at expanding its influence in global trade and infrastructure. However, recent developments indicate a shift as CK Hutchison Holdings has agreed to sell its stakes in these ports to a US-led consortium, including BlackRock. These investments have sparked debates about geopolitical influence, with concerns raised over China's strategic presence in such a critical location. After 3 years of construction, a Chinese-built toll road has opened during 2016 on the island country of Jamaica. The project marks the biggest Chinese investment in the Caribbean to date, and officials said there's more to come. Russian oil company Rosneft reportedly poured around $9 billion into Venezuelan projects since 2010, but struggled to break even. Issues included PDVSA owing Rosneft hundreds of millions of dollars, difficulties in acquiring basic drilling equipment, and funds being diverted to social projects in remote areas. Despite these setbacks, Rosneft continued its investments, partly due to the Kremlin's strategic interest in supporting its ally, Venezuela. In 2020, Rosneft decided to terminate its operations in Venezuela and sold its assets to a company fully owned by the Russian government. This move was seen as a way to shield Rosneft from U.S. sanctions targeting its Venezuelan operations. La Orchila, an island off the coast of Venezuela, has been a point of interest for Russian military activities in the Caribbean. In 2018, reports emerged that Russia intended to establish a military presence on the island. This plan included the potential deployment of strategic bombers, such as the nuclear-capable Tupolev Tu-160, for long-range missions. While Venezuelan law prohibits permanent foreign military bases, temporary deployments of military assets are allowed. This legal framework has enabled Russia to use La Orchila for military exercises and as a strategic location for its air force. The collaboration aligns with Venezuela's close ties to Russia, particularly under the leadership of Nicolás Maduro. Thank you for watching, and we hope you enjoyed this presentation. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel by pressing the subscribe button below. We are planning to add many more presentations covering a wide variety of science, history, and other enriching subjects. If you have any comments, questions, or suggestions, please feel free to make them, and we will do our best to respond. Again, thanks for watching, and please do subscribe.